The coffee mug slipped from my fingers when my father's voice cracked through the kitchen like a whip. "Get out, and don't you dare come back." I stood there for a second, staring at him, this man I'd spent 31 years trying to make proud. And I thought, okay, just like that. Okay. So I left. And 3 weeks later, when my grandmother's estate lawyer called me with news that made my hands shake, I finally understood why they'd wanted me gone so badly. I need to back up. My grandmother, Grandma Edith, was the kind of woman who kept her finances in a leather-bound ledger and paid for everything in cash because she didn't trust banks after the savings and loan crisis in the 80s. She owned a home in Scottsdale outright, had a rental property in Tempe she'd held since 1979, and somewhere along the way had quietly accumulated about $340,000 in a brokerage account that nobody in the family knew existed except, apparently, my parents. She raised me, not in the official, court-appointed way, just in the practical, real way that matters. My mom dropped me off the summer I turned 7, said she needed a few weeks to sort some things out, and Grandma Edith just folded me into her life like it was nothing. I ate breakfast at her kitchen table every morning for 11 years. I helped her weed her tomato garden on Saturday mornings. When I got my first period, she was the one who drove to Walgreens with me, completely calm, bought me a heating pad and a bag of peanut M&Ms, and never once made me feel strange about it. My actual mother came and went, mostly went. And my father, my mother's husband, the man who'd stepped into the role somewhere around my 14th birthday when my mom finally did sort some things out, and brought him home, he was charming in the way that people who have never had to work very hard for anything tend to be charming. Name was Glenn. Big laugh. Good handshake. Very interested in Grandma Edith's property values. By the time I was in college, he was her primary contact for everything. Drove her to appointments. Handled the contractor when her roof needed replacing. Just helping out, he always said. My mom would nod along and say how lucky Grandma was to have someone so capable nearby. I was finishing my master's degree in Charlotte when Grandma Edith had her first stroke. Minor, they said. She recovered mostly, but her handwriting got shaky and she stopped driving. I flew home. I asked if she needed me to move back. She told me, and I remember this exactly. "Sweetheart, your life is there. Mine is handled." I didn't know what that meant then. She passed in February. Peaceful in her own bed, which is what she always wanted. I flew back for the service and stayed at my parents' house because my apartment in Charlotte felt too far away from whatever I needed to feel during that week. My mother cried at the funeral in a way that looked correct but felt hollow, the way an actress hits her mark. My father stood with his hand on her back and said things like, she was a real matriarch to people he'd met twice. The week after the service, I asked my father about the estate. He got very still. "It's being handled," he said. Same phrase Grandma had used. It sounded different coming from him. "I'd like to be kept in the loop," I said. "She raised me. I want to understand what's happening with her things." He looked at me the way you look at something that has unexpectedly become inconvenient. "You're not on the will, Joanna." I went cold. "What do you mean I'm not on the will?" "I mean, she updated it. She wanted the estate to go to your mother. Which means to us, as a family unit, that's what she wanted." I asked to see the will. He said it was with the lawyer and he'd get me a copy when things settled. I asked which lawyer. He said he'd have to look it up. I asked when. He said soon. That was a Tuesday. By Friday he still hadn't sent anything. I started making calls. Grandma Edith had used the same estate attorney for decades, a woman named Ms. Hartwell, semi-retired, office in a strip mall in Mesa that still had a fax number on the door. I remembered her name from a Christmas card I'd seen years ago. Ms. Hartwell picked up on the second ring. I explained who I was. There was a pause. "Joanna," she said carefully, "I'm glad you called. I've been trying to figure out how to reach you." She told me that Grandma Edith had indeed updated her will, but not in the way my father had described. The original will, drafted in 2009, had left everything equally between my mother and me. In the summer before she passed, someone had accompanied Grandma to a different attorney's office, not Miss Hartwell's, and a new will had been drawn up, cutting me out entirely and transferring power of attorney to my father for the final months of her life. Ms. Hartwell had only found out about the new document when the other attorney's office sent a courtesy notice. She'd tried to reach Grandma Edith directly and had been told she was not available to take calls. "Your grandmother was not well, Joanna," she said, "and some of what I've seen in these documents concerns me professionally." I sat in my rental car in the parking lot of a Safeway and just breathed for a minute. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," she said, choosing her words like she was picking up glass, "that if you wanted to contest this, you might have grounds." I went back to my parents' house that night and I was careful. I did not yell. I did not cry. I made pasta and set the table and asked my father, almost casually, how Grandma's estate was coming along. He said fine. Moving forward. Should be settled in a few months. I asked if he'd had any help with the paperwork over the past year. He said he'd handled most of it himself. I asked about the power of attorney. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. "Where did you hear that?" he said. I called Ms. Hartwell. My mother, who had been pretending to be absorbed in a magazine on the couch, put it down. "Joanna," my father said, and his voice had shifted into something I'd never heard before. Not angry yet, but the space right before anger, pressurized and controlled. "That is none of your business. My grandmother's estate is none of my business. You were not on the will." I was, actually, until someone took her to a different attorney's office without telling Ms. Hartwell, without telling me, and got her to sign a new document while she was recovering from a stroke. He stood up. "You need to be very careful," he said, "about what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly." That's when he pointed at the door and said it. "Get out, and don't you dare come back." I looked at my mother, who was looking at the floor. I picked up my purse, my keys, and the charger I'd left on the counter, and I walked out the front door. I checked into a Hampton Inn off the 101 and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then I called Ms. Hartwell back and told her I wanted to move forward. She gave me the name of a probate litigation attorney. I called him the next morning. His name was Mr. Bat. Okafor, efficient, methodical, the kind of attorney who doesn't speculate but asks very precise questions. He asked me to get everything I could document, any communications with Grandma Edith in the year before she passed, any records of her mental state, the original 2009 will, and anything I could find about the financial accounts. I had texts, emails. I had a birthday card she'd sent me in October, 4 months before she died, in which her handwriting was shaky but present, and she'd written, "The house will be yours someday, Joe. Don't let them tell you different." I photographed it and sent it to Mr. Okafor the same day. What unfolded over the next 6 months was something I only understood in pieces. Because probate litigation is not a clean narrative. It's slow and bureaucratic and full of documents that look identical until a lawyer explains why one of them is significant. But here's what came out. My father had obtained power of attorney in the fall, when Grandma Edith was at her most vulnerable after the stroke. The new will had been signed at an attorney's office my father had selected. Not one Grandma had ever used, not one Ms. Hartwell had any knowledge of. The timing, the circumstances, and the fact that Grandma had spoken to her own financial advisor just weeks before signing and expressed no desire to change her estate plan, all of it raised serious flags for the probate court. Mr. Okafor filed for a will contest on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. My parents hired their own attorney, a man who sent a lot of strongly worded letters very quickly. My father left a voicemail calling me vindictive and ungrateful for, and I want to quote this correctly, dragging your family through hell for money. My mother sent me a text that said only, "Please pray for us." I did not respond to either. Here's the thing about financial fraud involving an elderly person that I did not know before this process: it doesn't stay quiet. When the court started examining the estate, they requested an accounting of all assets and transactions handled under the power of attorney. My father had moved $87,000 from Grandma Edith's brokerage account into a joint account he shared with my mother during the 8 months he held POA. He characterized these transfers in the court filings as reimbursement for caregiving expenses. He did not have receipts. He also had not reported these transfers as income. The IRS, as one of my coworkers later put it when I told her the story, had entered the chat. I will not pretend I didn't feel something when Mr. Okafor told me that a referral had been made. I felt something. I felt it for about 20 minutes, sitting in my car, and then I drove to a coffee shop and got a large dark roast and let myself feel it fully before I put it away. The relief is complicated when it involves people you used to love. Or tried to. The probate court ruled in my favor on the will contest in early fall. The 2009 will was reinstated. The Scottsdale house, the Tempe rental, and the remaining brokerage assets reduced, but still substantial, came to me and my mother in equal shares. My mother did not speak to me at the hearing. She sat next to her attorney and looked at the table. I looked at the judge and said thank you. Mr. Okafor shook my hand outside the courthouse and said I'd done well keeping documentation. A lot of people clean out their phones, he said. You kept everything. I thought about that birthday card. Don't let them tell you different. I'd kept that too. The financial restitution took longer to sort out than the will contest. My father ultimately agreed to repay the $87,000 in transferred funds as part of a civil settlement, structured over several years, to avoid a separate civil lawsuit. Mr. Entire Okafor walked me through the terms and told me it was reasonable given what a trial would cost in time and money. I signed. The IRS matter was separate and not something I was party to. I don't know the full details. I know that a federal tax matter involving unreported income has a long tail. And I know that my father is no longer in the same house as my mother. And I know that from things my aunt, my mother's sister, who stayed in contact with me throughout all of this, has mentioned, things are not good. I don't know how to feel about that. I've stopped trying to feel any particular way about it. What I know is this. The Tempe rental property generates about $1,850 a month in rental income. I used the first 6 months of that to pay off the student loans I'd been carrying since my master's program. The Scottsdale house I've been navigating carefully. It needs updates before it could go on the market. And part of me doesn't want it to go on the market. Because I spent 11 years eating breakfast there and learning how to weed a garden. I've been going back on weekends sometimes. I cleaned out the kitchen. I found Grandma Edith's leather-bound financial ledger in a drawer under the silverware, entries going back to 1987 in handwriting that got shakier near the end but never stopped. I sat at her kitchen table with it for a long time. She knew what she had. She knew what she wanted. And someone spent the better part of a year trying to make sure she couldn't say so. That part still makes me angry. It probably always will. But the anger is clean now, not the tangled kind from before when I didn't understand what had actually happened. My mother and I speak occasionally, not often. She has never directly acknowledged what her husband did, and I've stopped waiting for it. She asks how I'm doing. I say fine. She says she misses her mother. I say I do too. It's not nothing. It's not what I wanted. But it's honest, which is more than we had before. I'm still in Charlotte. I took a long weekend last spring and drove down to visit a friend in Savannah, the first trip I'd taken in over a year that wasn't connected to lawyers or courts or estate paperwork. We walked along the river and ate shrimp and grits, and she asked how I was doing really, and I thought about it for a minute before I answered. I'm okay, I said. I think I'm actually okay. And I meant it. People ask me sometimes when I tell parts of this story, what I said to my father when I left that night, the night he pointed at the door. What did I say that left them speechless? Honestly, I didn't say much. I said, I found the letters, I have the bank records, and I already called the attorney. Then I left. I think about it now and I understand why that worked. It wasn't clever. It wasn't a speech. It was just the truth, delivered at the exact moment they realized I had it. There's something Grandma Edith used to say when I was a kid and something felt unfair. She'd look at me with that steady, patient expression she had and she'd say, Joanna, the truth doesn't expire. She was right. It just waited. And when I was ready, so was I. I've thought a lot about what actually made the difference in all of this. And it wasn't the attorney, as good as Mr. Okafor was. It wasn't the court ruling or the financial records or even Grandma Edith's birthday card with her shaky handwriting telling me exactly what she intended. Those things mattered. But what made them possible was something quieter. I kept showing up with honesty when everything around me was built on the opposite. That sounds simple. It isn't. There were a dozen moments where the easier thing was to accept what Glenn said at face value, to tell myself that maybe I had misunderstood, that maybe I was making something out of nothing because grief does strange things to people. I almost did that. The night he pointed at the door, part of me genuinely considered walking away for good, not just out of that house, but away from the whole mess, because the idea of fighting my own family in probate court felt humiliating in a way I hadn't expected. What stopped me wasn't anger. It was a much steadier thing. It was the knowledge that Grandma Edith had been specific. She had been deliberate. She had sat at her kitchen table for decades and tracked every dollar with care because she understood that what you build with intention can be dismantled by people who count on you not paying attention. She paid attention her whole life. The least I could do was pay attention when it mattered most. That's the thing about people who take advantage of someone's trust. They're almost always counting on everyone else being too uncomfortable to look directly at what's happening. Glenn moved $87,000 out of her account because he believed that by the time anyone noticed, it would be too complicated and too painful to pursue. He understood correctly that most people would rather absorb a loss than sit through a court process involving their own mother's estate. He just miscalculated which person he was dealing with. I've had people tell me I was brave for fighting this. I don't think that's the right word. I think I was just finally paying the debt I owed her. She showed up for me when I was 7 years old and had nowhere else to go. She gave me 11 years of stability and Saturday mornings and the kind of quiet consistency that you don't understand the value of until much later. Staying in that fight, through the paperwork and the legal fees and my mother's silence and my father's voicemails calling me vindictive. That wasn't bravery. That was just returning what she gave me, the only way I still could. What I want people to take from this, if anything, is that your clearest thinking happens when you stop waiting for the people who wronged you to acknowledge it. I wasted real time in those first weeks hoping my mother would say something honest. She didn't. She's still not able to. And the moment I accepted that and redirected that energy toward the actual problem, documentation, legal strategy, clarity, everything moved forward. Cause and consequence are patient. What Glenn did had a cost. Not because the universe was keeping score, but because fraud leaves evidence, and evidence lives in records, and records don't care about family politics. He made choices. They had consequences. That's the whole story. And Grandma Edith was right. The truth doesn't expire. It just waits for someone willing to carry it forward.